Get to welcome John Piotti of American Farmland Trust back to the stage. And joining him in this conversation is Miranda Kaiser, the president of the Rockefeller Family Fund. Give them a round of applause, everyone.
Thanks, Danny. We're getting adjusted here. Nice to be here.
It's
The
nice
lights
to be
are bright,
I
aren't
was just going to say, it's really bright. Oh.
And then they put the mic right up in front of you like this. Miranda, your family, the Rockefeller family, has a long and incredibly impressive history of philanthropic and engagement activities that have really helped change the world in very positive ways. I mean, we think of education, science, land conservation, environmental causes, and the like. So it's been profound. And but today we want to talk about a couple of pieces of that. One, a little later, I want to return to a small but I think very significant part of that, which is the fact that your grandmother was the lead founder of American Farmland Trust, and then you stepped up a few decades later and chaired our board. So I want to come back to that. But I want to begin by something that has really been a priority for you and other members of your family recently, which is holding to account ExxonMobil for what they knew and didn't say and didn't do about climate change. So talk about your family's involvement in this space and how it's unfolded.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for those kind words and for giving me this opportunity, because this is a story that I am sure people do not understand well enough, and it is so important. And my family got involved actually under my brother's leadership at the Rockefeller Family Fund back in 2015 and before. But I really want to make this story clear to all of you about what ExxonMobil has done over the years. So, and it's tragic and it's horrifying, and it comes around to solutions. So it's not all dark. But back in the 70s and before, ExxonMobil had some of the premier scientists in the world working for them. They were doing modeling of all sorts of things that was as good as what NASA was doing. And they were really committed. There were really good people there who were trying to understand the science around climate and everything else. This was before really understanding climate change. And then around in 1977, actually when President Carter first told the American public about climate change, inside Exxon, they also started to understand what was happening. And I have notes because I want you to hear these quotes. This is not just me making this up. These are internal documents from Exxon that the Rockefeller Family Fund, under my brother's leadership, helped uncover. In 1977, one of their senior scientists, James Black, wrote to the management that current opinion overwhelmingly favors attributing atmospheric CO2 increase to fossil fuel combustion. So he was making the tie. They got it. A year later, Black warned that present thinking holds that man has a time window of 5 to 10 years before the need for hard decisions regarding changes in energy strategies might become critical. So that was circulating in Exxon. Exxon is a micromanaging company. It's not like people don't know what is going on. And then they started to really figure out, like, this could be a problem for us, right? This is really tying back to our bread and butter, our industry. In 1980, there was a memo circulated in Exxon that said that the entire issue of climate change is significant to Exxon since future public decisions aimed at controlling the buildup of atmospheric CO2 could impose limits on fossil fuel combustion. Indeed, they noted that the question of global climate change was, quote, significant to all humanity. But they continued to fund the science, and they outfitted a tanker to measure carbon dioxide and everything else. But finally, it got to a point where one of the directors of their science labs stated in 1981 that by 2030, it was, quote, distinctly possible that cumulative carbon emissions could eventually, quote, produce effects which will indeed be catastrophic, parentheses, at least for a substantial fraction of the Earth's population. At that point, Exxon started laying off their scientists. They started funding bunk scientists, or real scientists that they could influence to start talking about the uncertainties in the field. They formed commissions and funded research to argue that climate science was unsettled. They attacked officials in the U.S. government and on UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, interfering with their work and trying to undermine it in the public eye. They formed a coalition of companies that pledged to launch a big communications effort. And by the way, most of those people were the same people that worked for the tobacco companies. They just went back to all of the same people, the lobbyists, the scientists, to do this. And that commission that had Exxon and some of the other fossil fuel companies and things stated in an internal memo that victory will be achieved when average citizens, quote, understand, parentheses, recognize, uncertainties in climate science, and when recognition of uncertainty becomes part of the, quote, conventional wisdom. So they knew, they got it, they understood it at all levels, and they had a range of choices, right? They could have buried the information and gone on. They could have come forward and said, well, we know this, but too bad our business model is something different. But they didn't do any of that. They put millions of dollars into confusing the public. And that was almost 50 years ago. Think where we would be now if 50 years ago they had not done that and they had gotten out of the way. And I also want to say that in addition to, standing in the way of the global climate treaties and all of their things, most of this happened under the leadership of Lee Raymond, who was there at the time. When he retired in 2005, for all of this good work, his retirement package was valued at $400 million. So it's pretty unconscionable, I have to say. But the good news, and I promised I would bring it back to good news.
Thank you.
Is that we have the science now, right? We have the technology. This is what John Kerry talked about, what people have been talking about. We have the will, we have the global awareness. We just need these guys to get out of the way.
Hear, hear. So where's it headed? What's the next step? What is your family pushing for? What do you hope are the outcomes?
Well, we're pushing for transparency. We're pushing for them to come forward and be accountable. We're not making any progress in that. There is still greenwashing. There's obfuscation. There's, now they're investing in, carbon capture and storage, which is not supported. So, of course, I would love to think this is a company that descended from Standard Oil, right? From my family's legacy. I would love to think that they would get on board and say, okay, great, let's throw in. I've given up that hope. So instead, what we're doing is we're putting a lot of energy in trying to figure out attribution science is part of it, to figure out exactly, how these current tragedies of the weather events are caused by the carbon emissions. And attribute to the companies their fair share of what's going on. And that is a piece of the litigation strategy. We obviously don't bring cases against ExxonMobil and others. We don't have that capacity, and that's not legal. But we do point out to attorney generals and others what they might want to be paying attention to, where we think there have been problems, and then we support the science that goes into the cases to show who is responsible for what and how they could potentially be held accountable. So the hope is that they will pay damages, that they will come clean about what they've done, and so if they won't voluntarily be part of the solution, at least punitively, they might be part of the solution if we can get them to pay for mitigation strategies now. But I think more importantly, and the reason I'm so glad to have this chance to tell this story, and I want this to get out there, is that we have to deprive them of their social license. They have to stop influencing our politicians. And until public sentiment really turns them into pariahs, that's not going to happen.
Hear, hear. Thank you for your efforts.
You're welcome.
Thanks for what you and I know you've picked up your brother David's legacy here, and the family is all behind it, and it's so important. So thank you. Thank you. As a citizen of this planet, we all need to thank you. But I want to pivot because I can't have you here and not give you a chance to talk about American Farmland Trust and to talk about your grandmother. With Secretary Kerry, he mentioned that his cousin, Fred Winthrop, was one of the founders of AFT. That's true. He was one of the people who your grandmother, Peggy Rockefeller, recruited. And, we can talk about emission reduction. That's important. But as I said in my opening remarks, we also need to think about what we can do with natural solutions. And I don't think your grandmother envisioned AFT 40 some odd years ago in necessarily addressing climate. Maybe she would have if Exxon had been telling her she should have. But she didn't do that. But she was focused on soil health. She was focused on farmland protection. And she created something that has really made a difference on the climate front since then. Tell us a little bit about how all that happened. What can you speak to?
Well, I was not intimately involved in it, so most of what I know is from knowing her later in her life and when I was in my 20s. But Granny just loved the outdoors. She loved open space. She also helped start Maine Coast Heritage Trust. She really saw the value in open land. In fact, on their honeymoon, my grandparents went to the Jackson Hole area and went on a camping trip, and she shot a bear. So she was very into being out there in the nature and doing things, being hands-on. But I think she also really understood the value of, good food, clean air, healthy lands. She believed very much in the people who were working the lands and the communities, and she was always right in there rolling up her sleeves. She learned how to artificially inseminate her own cattle. She drove her tractor. There was this bridge up in Columbia County where she had a farm that she kept driving her tractor over, and they kept saying, "Mrs. R, you can't drive your tractor over that. It's twice the weight of the bridge will take." And she said, "It's okay, I go twice as fast." So that's how she was.
And you picked up the legacy a couple of decades later, came on to AFT's board, then became our board chair at one point, before my time, sadly. I never had the chance of overlapping with you. But what was your reason to get involved? How did you see the connection between environmental issues and ag issues?
At that point, it was a pretty clear connection, I think, to most people, that we had to steward the land well to make a difference in terms of all of the problems with climate change. But I also really saw it as an issue that had the potential to be bipartisan. Healthy food and a healthy environment, it all ties back to our human health, and that cannot be a political issue. And I so appreciated how AFT worked with all sides to try and find solutions. That mattered an enormous amount to me. But I also knew that there were really strong forces in big ag that were playing out in the government and in entrenched interests. And it was important to me that there was a champion there for the small farmers and for finding a way to do agriculture in the right way that was helping all of us. And that's what I saw AFT doing, and it was really my passion for many years.
And you're also a little bit of a rancher on the side. You're like your grandmother. You come to this on both the organizational side, but also you get your hands dirty.
I'm leaving Friday to go to Montana to chase cows out of the mountains on a horse. It's awesome. Yes, I love it.
That's great. That's more of what we need. I mean, at American Farmland Trust, we do a lot of high-level policy work, but if we weren't getting our hands dirty, if we weren't working directly with farmers, we wouldn't have the knowledge, and we also wouldn't have the credibility to help move something broadly to get forward. So it's great that to recognize both the need for both sides of that and how it's connected.
And it's the farmers and the ranchers who will be the first to know if there's a new fungus in the soil. They will be the first to tell you when there's a new pest in the area.
Yep.
We can't litigate and mandate and control these things from a national level. You have to have the people on the ground who know what's going on, and they care more than anyone.
Yeah, they really do. I've worked with farmers professionally pretty much my whole career, close to 40 years. I have, with one or two exceptions of the real grumpy ones, and farmers can be grumpy, I've never found a farmer who denies climate change. And that might surprise some of you because you think of all these conservative farmers. There are a lot of people in rural America who deny climate change, but they're not farmers. They may be worried about how the government's going to use climate change to tell them what to do, but they recognize what's happening. They have to. They live with their land.
Yeah, and with the consequences.
Exactly, exactly. I'd love, I've heard some of them, but the crowd here hasn't. Tell us a granny story or two. There's some good ones.
There are some great granny stories. Well, I'll tell you one that I think actually is a nice lesson for all of us. When Granny cared about something, she wanted everyone involved. And we know how important this issue is, and we need to pull in everyone at every level and talk to them about what needs to be done. Granny had a particular window on how she could do this. So she found out that my grandfather, her husband, was going to Russia to meet with Gorbachev at the time. But she knew that Gorbachev's wife also bred cattle. So she sent with Grandpa a tank of bull semen and had him present it to Gorbachev through interpreters having to say, Mr. Gorbachev, my wife is sending your wife this semen. And if she was brave enough to do that, and he was brave enough, I mean, she mostly got what she wanted, but he was also very brave to do it. I think we all have to be out there trying to convince everyone of what we know.
Absolutely. And you and your family have really lived that to heart, and particularly with what you're doing with ExxonMobil and trying to make sure people understand what's out there and that we all need to rally behind that, and we have to hold businesses accountable.
Yeah, and it's not just Exxon, obviously. It is corporations generally. And I'll just tell a quick Grandpa story because he was probably 95 when one time I went with him to a Chase banking meeting. It was of the private bankers. It was very small. It was like 40 people or something, and it was when Jamie Dimon had just taken over. And they had speech after speech about how they were going to maximize profits and how they were going to, get into new areas and do all of this stuff. And at the end, they asked him if he would like to make remarks. And I was so impressed by his bravery because he knew this was not going to be popular. But he got up there at 95 and he said, it's great to make money, but what's really important is that we are good citizens. We have all of this power, and we need to give back. And you should have seen, it was like stone-faced. It was not well received, but he was also determined to give that message. And it is a part of the solution. It's wonderful that Unilever and some of these corporations are on board, but there are many more that we need to be talking to, and we need to, again, it's a piece of the Exxon story. If they can be made into social pariahs, they're one of the biggest companies in the world, maybe the rest of these companies will start paying more attention.
We all need to be good citizens.
Right.
Says it all.
Right.
If we all just live by that, what a different world this would be.
Yeah, and take care of each other.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.